Okay. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Hi, everybody. So, sorry we're getting started a little bit late, but thank you all for tuning in. My name is Stephanie. I am part of Black Student Success Program, and I'm here just helping Ms. Terry out tonight. But we're gonna go ahead and get started. Again, thank you all for tuning in to our October webinar lecture series for LGBTQIA month. And yes, we are going to be doing the Affirming Black, Queer, Feminist, and Intersectional Futures with our phenomenal, amazing, talented guest speaker tonight, Brandon Barnes. Pronouns are he, him, and they. So I'm going to let him take over.
Thank you, Steph. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We're doing some new things this week for week 2 of the lecture series. I am hopefully going to be able to work the Zoom functions for the questions and answers part of tonight's lecture series, as well as if there are any group chats going on. I may not answer immediately while presenting, so if you have any questions, feel free to put them into the group chat, but there should be about a 10 to 15 minute time frame at the end of today's lecture series for week 2. So I'm going to hopefully transition over to the Google Firefox. I think we're on search engine. Yes, we are. So we are, I believe everyone should be able to see the presentation, and I will go back to the beginning. So sorry if you saw a small preview, but we are recording, yes, Steph?
Yes.
Okay, so we are recording. Again, welcome to week 2 of our lecture series here for Affirming Black, Queer, and Feminist Intersectional Futures during LGBTQIA History Month. My name is Brandon Barnes again. My pronouns are he, him, and they. For anyone who is sticking around for the question and answer section. That being said, this week is similar, a little bit similar to week 1 in terms of how I'm going to do the introduction or the framework around how we're looking at this this week's topic, reclamation of Black women's studies, Black gay, lesbian, and bisexual studies in conversation with archival histories of the civil rights, Black power, and Black arts movement. So that's a very academic, large idea. As anyone who knows who's a student, faculty member in higher education, that's the way most academic journals read and sound when you're, or textbooks. But in gender, women's, and sexuality studies, we have a long history of some documented stories and some undocumented stories. So this week, we're talking about existence as resistance. Last week, for week 1, we talked about a rhetoric of resistance with first wave feminism. So this week, we're talking about second wave feminism. Second wave feminism roughly starts or begins in the late 1940s, so maybe after World War II. So around 1939, the beginning of World War I, the end of World War II, 1945. For historical context, I'm going to move forward with the text, the slide. But that's just a historical framework for you all to think about when does second wave feminism begin, which is really historically around the beginning of 1940 and the end of the 1970s, early 1980s. But before we get deeper into the historical context and historical background, I want to refresh everyone's memory for those of us who are coming back to this lecture series and those of us who are new for week 2. Here are 3 questions to help guide our thought process and for everyone here to be accountable in the learning process around this idea of reclamation of Black, queer, feminist, intersectional futures, right, during second wave feminism. And what does it mean to talk about intellectual production of Black revolutionary women? Question 1, what new knowledge am I seeking from today's lecture? Number 2, how do I call myself into accountability when I feel or think my privilege is challenged during today's lecture? Number 3, after today's lecture, Affirming Black, Queer, and Feminist Intersectional Futures, how can I cite Black women as political activists, community organizers, content creators, and religious reformers to decolonize my academic work / course syllabus here at Oakton Community College? So these are our lecture series discussion topic texts. On my left, and I'm pretty sure maybe your left of the screen would be C. Riley Snorton's Black on Both Sides, A Racial History of Trans Identity, written by a Black trans man, which is not the best introduction to this topic of reclamation of Black trans queer or Black queer femme intersectional futures, because it's very academic, it's very theoretical. But the stories in part 3 of the book are integral to a part of the series or the presentation for week 2. And I hope we have time and we get to it. If not, we may be able to touch on 3 of the names from this book that are very important as we talk about reclaiming Black trans identity during LGBTQIA History Month, and how there's a practice in academia as well as in American society, historically speaking, where the historical erasure of violence happens around Black bodies, right, across the gender spectrum. The second book we have here are All the Women Are White, All the Blacks Are Men, but Some of Us Are Brave, Black Women's Studies, which was edited by the authors, or I guess the architects really, of what is known as a Black feminist statement. Akasha Gloria T. Hull, Patricia Bell Scott, and Barbara Smith, with a afterward by Black feminist professor and author herself, Brittany Cooper. The third book here, Remaking Black Power, is by Ashley D. Farmer, How Black Women Transformed an Era. And that book will be talking about Black Africanism, Black nationalism, cultural nationalism, the Black Power movement, as well as the Black arts movement, and how Black women's role in shaping the policies in the Black Panther Party, as well as in cultural nationalist groups like Malana Karanga's US organization, as well as the Pan-African identity of Pan-African identity of the global African diaspora, and how Black power movements did not emerge suddenly in 1960s. I'm not sure if everybody can see my shirt here, but or probably not now because I'm sharing my screen. But when we return for the question and answer section, I do have on a.
Hey, Brandon.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Are you able to share your screen? We can
share my screen now.
Are you screen sharing?
I believe I am. Yes.
Okay, we only see you.
Oh, really? Okay, let me escape. Let me back out. Let me go to Zoom.
And in the middle. Share screen down at the bottom of the green.
Share screen in the middle. Okay.
And if you have any audio, just click like share audio too.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Let's try this again. Share. All right. How's that, Danielle?
There we go. There we go.
Got you. Okay. Now, okay. I knew there was something off. I'm like, usually the last week we saw, I could see myself in the top right corner, but the whole time I'm just talking, or lecturing. But yeah, as you can see, or as you already saw, my shirt has the Free People's Food Program, which was created by the Black Panther Party movement and really by the Black women in the Black Panther Party movement, which is the foundation for the free school lunch program in public school systems today, right? So that's important in terms of why I selected Ashley D. Farmer's book, Remaking Black Power, How Black Women Transformed an Era, where she talks about three specific Black types of Black women: the Negro militant, domestic worker, which are women during the 1930s, 1920s, 1940s, the Black revolutionary women. We think about Dr. Angela Davis, as we discussed last week from her book, Women, Race, and Class, Kathleen Cleaver, Erica Huggins, as well as Afeni Shakur, the mother of Tupac Shakur, Assata Shakur, those types of names that come up in our discussions around Black power, as well as the cultural nationalist Black woman, right? And the identity of Pan-African identity being a part of this longer history or memory of cultural Black nationalism and cultural nationalism around Black identity and womanhood. So in our last book on the finally on the right is Bell Hooks, Race and Representation. I think Black Looks, Race and Representation, where hopefully if we have time, we can get to a really good YouTube clip featuring Laverne Cox from Orange is the New Black, as well as a number of other primetime television shows and movies which she starred in, and won, I believe she's the first Black trans woman who has won an Emmy Award for her work, and I think Orange is the New Black, if I'm correct. But we're in that book, Bell Hooks talks about this idea of the oppositional gaze and the politics of Black female spectatorship and how that coined Bell Hooks termed during the 90s, I want to say, if I'm remembering my timeline correctly, when the book was published, talks about how Black women have had a long history of reclaiming ownership over their bodies, right? So we talk about bodily autonomy and gender and women's sexuality studies. So this is an extension of bodily autonomy regarding bodies, image, and how Black women, Black trans people, Black queer people talk about reclaiming power over their image and over their lives and over self-determination, right? Over self-defense, even, as we'll talk about here in a minute as we move forward with today's lecture. Here are a few key terms to keep in mind for second wave feminism. Again, thinking about that timeline, historically speaking, from roughly the beginning of World War I, 1939, till around the end of the 1970s, early 1980s Reagan era of America. So we have second wave feminism, a Black feminist statement by the Combahee River Collective from the book we just talked about, Black Women's Studies. Identity politics is also from a term from a Black feminist statement, which is important because identity politics, many times we hear that term bandied about and used as a political wedge issue in a lot of election seasons, which we're in again coming up in November for the state of Illinois as well as around the country. But identity politics is something I want to talk about briefly as you all read through the rest of the terms. But identity politics is not and does not mean political correctness, right? Conservative propaganda would have us as a community, as students, as academics, as residents, as members of American society, believe that identitarian politics, as is many times called now by a number of conservative propagandists and conspiracy theorists on the right, that identity politics is a bad thing. Identity politics is the part of the intellectual production of Black feminist and Black lesbian women, such as Barbara Smith, who was a part of that Combahee River Collective, who created the Black Feminist Statement. And the rest of these terms here are for you to read through and kind of do your own research as you think about those 3 questions we talked about at the beginning of the lecture. Again, here is just a week 2 historical background where we are dealing with things in local context as well as in global context. From my background as an interdisciplinary student and scholar and professor, I talk about the macro into the micro. So I start from a large perspective and work my way backwards towards what do things look like on the ground, right? In terms of how I approach my scholarship. We have the Great Depression, Black Chicago Renaissance, World War II is going on. There's eugenics law in the US, which deals with forced sterilization, which hopefully, if we have time, we'll get to that. We also have Jim and Jane Crow. Jane Crow being, if you were here last week, that was the coined term by the queer feminist constitutional scholar, Pauli Murray. So that's just kind of an outline of where we are in time during the second wave of feminism, right? Let's move forward. This is a content warning and trigger warning again, and I'll try to provide some levity where possible, but just so we all are on the same page, we will be discussing the following content warnings and trigger warnings. And there is mention of transphobia, mention of the early to mid 20th century historical, medical, legal, and social term transvestite, misgendering, gay panic defense, forced sterilization, HIV stigmas, sexual assault, incest, rape, and police sexual violence. I figured the image of Ice-T being here is apropos with the phrase "stairs and especially heinous" regarding special victims units, because we will be talking about the reality of racialized and sexual violence against Black bodies that are racialized and gendered in this historical context of American society and in global context. So this week, we're discussing this idea, again, historically, just to give us a framework of what's going on about who are the dominant faces of during the second wave feminism. There's a really great, I guess, not biographical film, but kind of documentary film. I think it was on Hulu maybe, or FX. It was called Miss America. It came out maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and it starred a number of very high profile celebrities. Kate Blanchett, as was one name, who plays Phyllis Schlafly, which we'll get to in a minute. But on our left, that particular biographical or documentary film, I keep saying biographical, documentary film, discussed second wave feminism, right? And these conflicting, these complex ideas around gender, sexuality, homosexuality, and what does it mean to come out of the closet, right? What does it mean to actually stand up for gay rights, and whose rights were being fought for and being preserved, and who was being erased or pushed to the margins of an already marginalized group in American society. So on the left, we have a picture of Jean O'Leary at Texas Gay Pride Week in 1979. This particular slide is here because we're talking about trans-exclusionary radical feminism, also known as TERFs, in gender, women's, and sexuality studies, also on the internet. A current iteration of TERFs would be J.K. Rowling. Think of J.K. Rowling when you look at Jean O'Leary. For those of us in the millennial Gen Z era of our generation, regarding LGBTQIA history and current events. And J.K. Rowling terms herself as a gender critical feminist, which is literally just a spawn of TERF, of the trans-exclusionary radical feminism. But in 1973, second wave radical feminists who were members of pro-LGBTQIA rights groups such as Gay Liberation Front and Gay Activist Alliance began to view drag queens, street queens, and femme queens such as Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Lee Rivera as mockeries of biological women. Gina O'Leary, founder of Lesbian Feminist Liberation and who also co-founded National Coming Out Day, which was last week, was one of the most notable voices of what gender and women's sexuality studies scholars refer to as trans-exclusionary radical feminism. So that being said, think about J.K. Rowling when you see or you hear the name Gina O'Leary. That being said, there are students of LGBTQIA history and gender and women's and sexuality studies who do not or would not associate J.K. Rowling with Gina O'Leary. However, Gina O'Leary referred infamously to Sylvia Lee Rivera at the 1973 Christopher Street March Parade as a man in a dress. This is an echo or an origin of the echoes we hear now around people who are trans pretending to be women, that they are not who they say they are, and that trans people are not faithful authors of their own life story or narratives, right? There's a really great Netflix documentary or first-person documentary or first-person interview documentary called Disclosure that talks about that, which is narrated by Laverne Cox. The second slide here is Phyllis Schlafly. Phyllis Schlafly was a very renowned and very foundational part of much of what we still hear in conservative propaganda around various policies and bans on trans youth and being able to access gender affirming healthcare, right? So this is a quick, brief rundown of who Phyllis Schlafly was and what legacy, if you will, she left behind for us all to deal with as gender, women, and sexuality studies scholars. Respectively, in 1952 and later in 1970, after losing both bids as a nominee for the 24th Congressional District in Alton, Illinois, Phyllis Schlafly began what she called a pro-family campaign she named Stop the ERA. STOP is an acronym for Stop, I forgot what it was now. I can't remember. Stop basically talked about infringing on privileges, right? So Phyllis Schlafly is coming from a place where she's talking about, she understands and recognizes her privilege, and she thinks that being a white woman, she calls herself a housewife, being able to enjoy domesticity is the highest calling on a woman's life, right? By 1973, and the ERA part, is also the Equal Rights Amendment, which did not pass by a margin of 3 states to become an amendment in the Constitution, which would have helped create the language to stop discrimination on the basis of biological sex assigned at birth or gender identity or gender expression, as well as sexual orientation. So this is the discussion we're having now around Roe versus Wade, around gender affirming healthcare, have a very long history in American politics. By 1973, speaking of Roe v. Wade, the SCOTUS ruling access to abortion as constitutional, Schlafly's public speeches against communism, debating second wave feminists, such as Betty Friedan, the author of The Second Sex, I believe, if I remember correctly, and decrying homosexuality, laid the groundwork for the future nomination and election for Ronald Reagan, who's on the right, talking with Jerry Falwell. And before her death in 2016, she endorsed Donald Trump. So there's a lot that Phyllis Schlafly did to basically undo what second wave feminism was trying to work towards in terms of equality and equity regarding gender and sexuality, right? Not to be outdone by Phyllis Schlafly, we have on the right here, Anita Bryant. Anita Bryant was a very interesting person. I wasn't sure if the animation was going to pop up correctly, but in 1977 in Dade County, Florida, they passed a pro-LGBT plus city ordinance prohibiting discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. Anita Bryant was a self-proclaimed conservative Christian Southern Baptist who began what she called direct marching orders from God. against gay rights. So for those of us who are in faith communities, who are on the LGBTQIA spectrum, who are believers in any faith community, right? Whether it's Judaism, Christianity, whether it is Islam, whether it is Buddhism, Hinduism. I know this month is also, we're celebrating Diwali, nationwide. So when you have a conservative religious belief or upbringing around gender and sexuality, in today's terms, there is an echo of its origin in race from America's inception around who has the right to be recognized as a human being, right? Who has fundamental constitutional rights. And that is what Anita Bryant and Phyllis Schlafly here are basically at odds with, and created a groundwork that is still alive and well today in the state of Florida and states like Oklahoma, Texas, Idaho, where we have Anita, we can credit, if you will, for lack of a better word, Anita Bryant's 1977 quote unquote conservative religious crusade that was anti-gay called Save Our Children, right? So this whole idea around people who are in support of LGBTQIA rights, who are in Congress or who are running on a platform of equality and equity, diversity, equity, inclusion, or belonging. There's this idea of calling people who are progressive politicians groomers, or even worse, criminally pedophiles, which is not true, right? Those two terms have nothing to do with LGBTQIA identity, but this conservative, religious, political economy of words around Save Our Children, Stop the ERA, pro-family, that kind of propaganda creates this political wedge issue around where parents of trans children are being investigated because there is the idea that parents who are affirming children's gender pronouns and gender identity are somehow criminal, right? And there's that criminalization around LGBTQA identity. I'll go forward because I'm not sure how much where we are on time right now. Okay, 6:30, so 15 minutes, and I have about probably 10 more slides to get through. So that's probably all won't happen tonight. But I'll kind of move past Jerry Falwell and the moral majority and Ronald Reagan for now. Let's see if it'll pop up anyway. So that being said, this is a little levity. I talked about, if you all are, have engaged in any time on the internet, on any social media feeds, you probably have seen this meme where it's basically all of these supervillains from Batman staring back at Gina O'Leary and Phyllis Schlafly, Anita Bryant, and Ronald Reagan in supervillain confusion, right? Like not even the worst of Batman supervillains would stoop as low as those particular actual real live people, right? Who have done real harm to the lives and bodies and histories of Black LGBTQIA people, right? So that being said, let's move forward a little bit, if I can. And here is where we get into more of our content and trigger warning. This is a video that is from Lene Venezzi, discussing misogynoir, which is a specific type of sexism and racism Black women experience in not only LGBTQIA spaces, but also in Black power movement spaces or Black or cultural nationalism spaces, historically speaking. And on the right, we have two images of two people she's going to talk about, Reverend James Bevel, and what the Minister of Information from the Black Panther Party, Eldridge Cleaver.
Misogynoir has not only resulted in Black women not getting credit, misogynoir has also let a lot of Black men get away with doing a lot of things to Black women. Make it plain. And my thing is, if y'all are upset about
Sorry about that.
about us taking some of these wrongfully bestowed flowers and giving them to the women that deserve them, oh, they're not gonna like it. Girl, just say it. They're gonna be mad at me for this one. Well, that's too damn bad. Then y'all gonna be real sad to find out the truth about how some of y'all's faves treated Black women back in the day. Tell the truth, shame the devil. For example, Reverend James Bevel. Bevel was a minister that helped to spearhead the Birmingham Children's Crusade, a surprisingly little-known movement in Black history, where thousands of Black children in Montgomery, Alabama, marked in the streets for integrations when their parents couldn't and went to jail. 5,000 arrests were made. So while Bevel played a crucial role in orchestrating the movement, Bevel was also convicted of incest and raping his own Black daughters. Eldridge Cleaver, famed leader of the Black Panther Party, but also admitted in his book Soul on Ice that when he was younger, he had aims to rape white women as some sort of retribution. And so he practiced raping young Black girls because he knew nobody would care about them. We're gonna need some more. Tea is hot, but the facts are facts. And be clear, none of this takes away from what they did for these movements. But if you walk like a duck and quack like a duck, then guess what? Affleck not paying me. But I'm sure a lot of Black men will prefer us not to talk about these things, especially during a month like this. Making statements like, yo, some things we shouldn't talk about. Some of these things were necessary for us to get to the place that we are today. Oh, you mean like when the white folks didn't want us to talk about slavery because it was necessary for America to become what it is today? But what a lot of Black men either forgot, and honestly it's men and women who've internalized misogynoir, but what a lot of y'all either forget, fail to realize, or just ignore really, is that we aren't just Black, we're women too. And that is the reality of our Black history. And Black women all over the globe have kind of come to this point where we're kind of tired of sweeping things under the rug. We've come to this point of undoing the things that once did us under. Okay, calling it out so that it won't happen again, so things can be better for the young Black girls of tomorrow. And also so we don't further internalize misogynoir and project it on the Chloe Baileys of the world who are just minding their young, fine Black woman ass business. But that might be a whole nother conversation.
So that being said by Lene Vinay, I want to give space and hold space for Black women as intellectual producers of their own lived experiences, right? My job as a professor in gender and women's sexuality studies who presents as male, who identifies with my gender or my sexuality assigned at birth, but uses they and them pronouns as a space holder for the people in my lineage and my heritage and my ancestry who were Black and trans, Black and intersex, Black and gender nonconforming, Black and gender loving, whose stories have been erased or pushed to the margins of our own family, community, and society, right? It's important for people like myself who are men, right? It's our job to undo patriarchy. It's our job to undo sexism and misogyny, right? It's our job as people who are straight passing or straight presenting, right, or cisgender or heterosexual, to undo homophobia and transphobia and queerphobia, right? To talk about male privilege, right? That Lene Vinay just talked about with Reverend James Bevel when she said Black men or Black people in general may not want to talk about the reality that our leaders of these movements, right, did these criminal or heinous acts to their own children and to their own community before finding redemption, right? At the expense of Black women, Black girls, Black queer folks' bodies, right? So that idea of what does it mean to reclaim intellectual production? What does it mean to to hold space and give space? One of the things you all did as attendees, you all agreed to a brave space agreement, right? We talk about what does it mean to talk about these really hard or complex subjects. In my work, to deal with this idea around sexualized violence, gendered violence, and racialized violence, right? It's not just about talking about things in retrospect through from a 2022 point of view and saying, oh, well, everything's all right now. No, things are better, but there are still a lot of echoes. There are still a lot of real everyday issues facing Black trans, Black intersex, Black gender nonconforming, Black non-binary, Black and disabled people, right? And our ideas of liberation, right? And our ideas of self-defense and our ideas of reclamation about who has the right to be free and right, who has the right to speak, right? Who has the right to take up space. And many times it looks like a Reverend James Bevel and Eldridge Cleaver in our historical recitations of what does it mean to be Black in America. So that being said, let's move forward a little bit to the next slide, if I think this will work.
Misogynoir has not only resulted in Black.
I'm not sure if it will. There we go. So this is another moment of levity. This is a history of Black revolutionary women as we transition using this meme of Representative Maxine Walters to discuss what does it mean to reclaim their political voices, bodies, and image as intellectual production from World War II to the Cold War era. I don't want to loop that. But
Reclaiming my time.
Okay.
Reclaiming my time. Reclaiming my time.
Okay.
so I'm sure everybody's familiar with this clip from, I believe it was like 2017, 2018, when this clip came out during the testimony during someone being put on trial in front of Congress for not doing their job under the Trump administration. And Representative Maxine Waters said, no, you're not going to cut me off. And that's what Black women and Black femme, Black queer people have been saying from the beginning of America as its settler colonialism beginnings, right?
Reclaiming my time.
Okay.
Let's move forward. One of those people here is, and the title up top says Black Embodiment of Gender Variance Transhistoriography. And I never got a chance to finish that, my mistake. I had another thought, but never got back to editing this particular slide. But here we're talking about Stormy DeLavier, right? Stormy DeLavier is a woman who many times is erased in the history of the Stonewall Rebellion. She was known as the Lady of the Jewel Box Review, where she was a Black lesbian drag king employed as the master of ceremonies and female vocalist for the integrated show of predominantly female impersonators. The show was called 25 Men and One Woman at the time. Think about in historical context, this is the 1939, roughly 1940s, 1950s, where we don't have language for gender variance yet, or transgender identity, or gender nonconforming or non-binary, right? There's a limited amount of context around gender identity at this time. At the time, the predominant terminology is homosexuality or homophile, right? That before the LGBTQIA movement, the LGBTQIA community referred to themselves as the homophile movement. So keep that in mind as we think through some of the terminology that was historically and legally and socially accurate for this particular moment in American history. Where are we on time?
You have 2 more minutes.
2 more minutes. So I won't be able to finish the entirety of my presentation, but this will end here talking about Stormy DeLavier, because Stormy DeLavier is a person in conversation with Marsha P. Johnson. They both, as I'll move forward, Marsha P. Johnson being 2 of the names that are oftentimes erased in LGBTQIA history around the Stonewall Inn Rebellion, right? Stormy DeLavier is credited by eyewitnesses as being the butch lesbian, right? Who threw the first punch, or was the person who sparked or ignited the patrons of the Stonewall Inn to rise up or push back against police surveillance, police arrest, police and gender policing at the time in New York City. Marsha P. Johnson is oftentimes credited as being the person who what's been called, who threw the first shot glass heard around the world, as a call back to the American Revolution with the shot heard around the world. But Marsha P. Johnson said, no, she didn't do it. She didn't throw it. She was there, but some credit her as dropping a very heavy purse onto the windshield of a police cruiser that night in 1969, I believe. But these 2 names, if you don't remember any of the names from tonight's presentation, definitely remember Stormy DeLavier and Marsha P. Johnson, who Marsha P. Johnson went on to co-found with Sylvia Lee Rivera. They were house mothers of what would be known as the STAR House, STAR being an acronym for Street Transvestite Action Revolutionary, founded in 1970. And also something to remember from Marsha P. Johnson's life, the P stood for Pay It No Mind. And Pay It No Mind was a reference or a flippant way of doing intellectual labor work when people would question her about her gender or her identity, right? So that being said, I think we're at time. Yes. So that being said, we have 15 minutes roughly to kind of ask any questions. And my apologies for some of the redundancies in the middle or at the beginning of this presentation. So that being said, thank you for attending. And Danielle, am I running the question and answer session for the chat, or are you doing that?
I'm running the Q&A.
Okay,
so,
I see, yeah, there's a chat and there's 2 questions and those bubbles down there.
Yes. Okay. So if anybody has any questions, comments, please post them in the Q&A.
Yes.
I think I'm still processing a bit on some things. So thank you very much for this presentation.
Thank you again. And feel free to ask any questions you like. If there's something that was not covered by the presentation that maybe you have read prior to tonight's lecture pertaining to LGBTQIA History Month, or if there's something from week 1 that someone may want clarification on, or, that's perfectly fine too.
I would like to just say, I do really appreciate you holding space and bringing up in your lectures around misogynoir and, through some of these movements, how Black women and just, some of the things that have kind of been swept under the rug and pushed to the margin. So I do appreciate you kind of bringing those to light.
No problem. I definitely want to make sure, as I mentioned, to hold space for the names. And the next slide I was going to get to, if time allowed or permitted, was Fannie Lou Hamer and how she, along with several of her Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC volunteers, while traveling through Winona, Mississippi, in an effort to register Black residents to vote, faced police sexualized violence, which is something we'll talk about in week 3 regarding mass incarceration and how police violence is gendered. So that's something I wanted to touch on, just so those of us who are coming back to this lecture series for our final lecture next week for week 3 would have a knowledge base for that. That police violence against Black men like George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery, or the names we can think of when we think about Black Lives Matter. We don't think about names like Tony McDade, who was a Black trans man who was murdered in Florida in 2020, or CC McDonald, who was incarcerated for fighting back against white supremacists, a racist, and a misogynist, and someone who's transphobic, right? We don't think about many of the Black, queer, or trans, or gender nonconforming people, or women. We don't think about Malaysia Booker. We don't think about, or we don't necessarily name in our discussions around racialized or gender violence the names of Black women, right? Charlene Lyles. We don't think about who else I'm trying to think of. Off the top of my head, I guess a short list of names I could think of, but that's important to talk about misogynoir and how that specific targeted type of hatred that is racialized and sexism and misogynistic creates an unduly burdensome amount of violence unnecessary violence that no person should have to face, right, on the basis of race or sex or gender.
Thank you so much for that answer.
Yeah.
So we do have a couple questions here, and so I'm going to go ahead and read them off.
Okay.
So we have our first question from Mary Griffin, which says, can you talk more about who gets to claim, label, or create labels? Really good question.
Who gets to, if I'm hearing the question right, did I hear it correctly when I say who gets to name or create labels around? Is there more to the question or just that?
It was just that, unfortunately.
Okay. And that was Mary. Is Mary still here with us, or has Mary left the chat? Mary Griffin? Yes. If I'm understanding your question correctly, Mary, thank you for your question, one. Number two, if I'm understanding your question correctly, are you referring to labels around gender identity or gender pronouns, or are you talking about labels regarding like moments of violence that are racialized or sexualized or gendered?
While we wait for their response, I'm going to go ahead and I'll move on to the next question, because it's kind of two of the same.
Okay.
But Tristan and Melissa asked, from the books that were posted earlier in your presentation, which one would you recommend? And blending it into Melissa's question, between the first and the second wave feminism, what book, movie, documentary would you recommend, or that is your favorite?
Okay, that's good. Out of the list I shared, I would say second wave feminism. Black women studies. All the women are white, all the blacks are men, but some of us are brave. I would definitely pick that one up regarding second wave feminism, because that talks exclusively or extensively about a Black feminist statement. It talks and unpacks more than I could in the presentation, what those particular Black feminist and lesbian women were talking about, who are really the forerunners and foremothers of Black Lives Matter, because Black Lives Matter was founded by Black queer women, right? Black lesbian women. So I would definitely pick up, but some of us are brave. In terms of my favorite film between first and second wave feminism, there are a number of them. I'm trying to think of one that would be a good recommendation. First wave feminism, wow, that's a good first wave, second wave feminism. I would recommend, in light of what we just finished discussing, Stormy DeLavier, Lady of the Jewel Box. That would be a good kind of bridge film between first wave feminism and second wave feminism. That's Stormy DeLavier, Lady of the Jewel Box.
Okay, and going back to Mary's question,
Okay.
they were able to clarify, they said labels around who you are. So who gets to create labels around who you are?
Okay. Who gets to create labels around who you are? As an individual, I would say yourself. Like, if you are the person who may be on the journey of gender, or a gender journey of maybe possibly coming out, or in search of a community, or in search of support, I would say you get to name who you are. Similar to, say, for instance, as an example, if you are in a group of people and this is your first time meeting them, and you have those name tags with the markers, it says to write your name, and you have a preferred name. So your name is Mary, right? Say, for instance, this is just hypothetical. If you don't like the name Mary, if you prefer the name Hope, because I see you have Mary Hope Griffin. If you say, my name is Hope, but there may be other people in the room or nearby who may know you as Mary, and they think that may give them pause to say, I always knew you as Mary. Why are you suddenly, identifying with the name Hope? It's a personal preference. It's who you are as a person and how you are evolving as an individual. So I hope that answers your question around like labels, or if that example is a good example.
All righty. And then moving on to our last two. So Lindsay Hewitt asked, can you speak a bit more to some of the reasons why important LGBTQIA plus freedom fighters like Marsha, Sylvia, and Stormy were actually discriminated against within the mainstream LGBTQ plus rights movement, both at the time in the 1960s, as well as today in our accounting of LGBTQ history in the US?
Why were they discriminated against? That's a very good question. And I think that is a two-part answer. One, they were discriminated against in their own words. Stormy DeLavier, her life is very well documented, actually, because of her career as a public performer in a predominantly was known as a drag performance show, or a troupe of drag performers, or female impersonators. She was interviewed by a number of different publications, as well as there are a number of people who she built community around. But she talked about from an early age, she was discriminated first in her life. She encountered discrimination based on her skin color, because in her words, she said she was the child of a Negro mother and a white father. So she was always being chased or beaten up on account of her being, in her words, a Negro with a white face. So she understood racism before she even began to understand who she was, or came out as lesbian and regarded her sexual orientation. So that example from Stormy DeLavier's life is endemic to American US society in terms of how racism and sexism work with each other. And that's why I mentioned the book, But Some of Us Are Brave, in terms of Black women's studies, because that book talks about, it mentions a history of Black women scholars who talk about overlapping oppressions or interlocking oppressions, right? How racism, sexism, misogyny, homophobia overlap with each other. Like, it's hard to unentangle those particular biases and discriminatory actions when they are part of the US institutions that we all are familiar with, from school to healthcare to the legal system to just name it, just getting on the bus day to day. A person can feel when they are not welcome, right? Or they don't belong. So that idea of feeling or knowing that you are not welcome based on your skin color and your sexual orientation overlap with each other. And that's what the Combahee River Collective called interlocking oppressions, which occur in US society and in quote unquote, movements for liberation, whether it's the LGBTQIA movement or the Black Power movement or, the Civil Rights movement or Black Lives Matter.
We have one last comment, and this is from Allie Weiland, who says, I don't have a question, but I wanted to also highlight Ms. Major Griffin Gracie and her work with the TGI Justice Project.
Correct, I agree with that. Yeah, I wanted to get to Ms. Major, but time and space in the presentation wouldn't allow, because Ms. Major is still with us, working in Arkansas. She founded a house called the House of Gigi for Black trans youth who are homeless, who have been kicked out of their homes because they're trans, or they've come out, or they were outed. And she's also writing her memoir or her biography, which I think is coming out sometime either this year or next year. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Allie.
Okay, and so that looks like that's all the questions and comments we have. We are at time this evening. Oh wait, there's one more something. Let me see.
Okay.
Okay, Tristan says thank you to the speakers and hosts.
Thank you, Tristan.
Thank you, Tristan.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for this evening, Professor Brandon. As always, thank you very much.
Thank you,
And
David.
we hope to see you all next week for our last installment, which is Free Our Sisters, Free Ourselves. Okay, so have a good night, everyone. Thank you.
All right, take care.